Tansin ni tutemtik, nitsika son Chelsea Vowel, egwa mantu sakaigene kotsenia, apito gosasan esqueonia, apo tpemsu esqueonia. Egwa nitayan newo nitanesak, egwa peak nitanes apo negoses uta. Egwa kirinaskomit in a while, Mr. He Kiawao. I'm Chelsea Vowel. I'm from Lac Saint Anne, and I'm telling you that I have 4 daughters, 2 of which are here, and another daughter or son on the way. And I'm telling you also that I'm a Métis woman, or we also call ourselves the people who own themselves. That's our more extravagant name for ourselves. The Cree just call us half sons. Both are fine. And I wanted to talk briefly because I'm very interested in having a conversation here and not just speaking to you. But the idea of treaty relationships. I come from Treaty 6 territory, and some of my family are signatories to that treaty, and some are Métis who took scrip instead of treaty. But nonetheless, we live in that territory. And so growing up, I was also always very aware of treaty as a thing, you know. It was always this thing that people talked about. But I didn't really understand what treaty meant because, around treaty days, people line up and you get this RCMP officer in his beautiful outfit and handing people $5. You know, it's this strange thing if you've ever seen it. And the thing though, when people go there and they get their $5, I know so many people who pose with it and get pictures, and it's not a joke. This isn't a joke. This is a very serious thing. And the people on our side who are signatories, who are treaty, part of this treaty, and who go in there, they get their $5. To them, that's the renewal of the treaty. Every year, the treaty must be renewed. And that $5 was promised. Okay, it wasn't indexed for inflation. Okay, but nonetheless, it's symbolic of a relationship. And I think that's one thing that gets lost when a lot of Canadians think about treaties. Because the way that we think about treaties in Canada is there's treaties that we have with other nations, and then there's treaties here, these historical treaties that we're always hearing about, people are always complaining about. But real treaties with other nations, of course it makes sense that you're going to renew them and that you're going to continue to dialogue with those other nations, right? You're not just going to sign something hundreds of years ago and never talk to that country again. That makes sense. But for some reason, a lot of people can't wrap their heads around the idea of that being a similar situation with the treaties that were signed here. And so I think the idea of bringing the idea of this being a relationship back to the forefront of our consciousness is very important. Because when those treaties were signed, whether they're the historic number treaties or they're the treaties of peace and friendship, those treaties were signed between equals who wish to live in peaceful coexistence with one another. And you can't do that. You can't do that if you have a superior to inferior situation, right? Our peoples know how much we helped the newcomers survive here. And when you enter into an agreement to share the land with one another, you do so in friendship, because if you come into conflict, you're not just interfering with somebody else's ability to live peacefully. You're also creating imbalance for yourself, and nobody wants to make a mess in their own home. So when I think about relationships have to be renewed. You don't get married and then never speak to the person again. I mean, not if you actually want to have a good relationship, right? And I think about my partner, who is non-native, and he doesn't tell me how to be Indigenous, and he doesn't tell me how to think, and he doesn't tell me what to believe, and he doesn't tell me how to organize my life and my space. But because we live together, we have to make agreements. And sometimes we don't agree, and we have to compromise. And that's relationship. And that's what we need to have between Canadians, settlers, and newcomers, and our peoples. When I'm saying this, I don't think that any of you are thinking that this is an incredibly strange or alien concept. And yet somehow we can't do it. And this goes back to the issue of education. I think that a lot of settlers believe that they know who we are. They know who Indigenous peoples are. They know all of these things that they've learned, all these stereotypes that they've learned. And the fact of the matter is that they don't know us at all. And part of the problem there is that some of us We don't know ourselves that well either because so much has been lost. So much has been erased. Where I come from, in the lake where I come from, Lac St. Anne or Mantu-Sakaigan, this is a very sacred spot. Many different nations come there every year for an annual pilgrimage and go into the lake. It's very, very important to our peoples. It was so polluted last year that we had cyanobacteria in the water. I mean, you already can't eat the fish there unless you like fish with 3 eyes. But it was so polluted that you could actually literally get sick standing next to the water. That's how bad it is out there. Now, this is an incredible. I can't stress to you how important this lake is, and the fact that we can't fish there. We can't even stand beside the water anymore. Is really, really troubling. Because so much of who we are, who the people from my community are, come from that lake. Our teachings come from the lake. Our language is centered around that lake. Many of us made our living from that lake until, in my parents' generation, well, it's no longer possible. And I don't think that the non-natives living around that lake don't care. They get their water from the lake as well. They used to fish or buy the fish that we caught as well. And so these linkages that we can make between people who share the land, like literally share the land. We're living side by side. We're drinking the same water. We're sharing the same resources. And somehow, when you walk into a bar in Alberta Beach, there's an invisible line, and whites are here, and natives are there, and you don't cross the line unless you want to start a brawl. That's how it still is. And I see that as symbolic of how the relationship still is here in Canada. There's a lot of segregation, whether physical or mental. And if we want to have a relationship with one another, and I'm saying I do, settlers are not going to leave. Whatever we say about go back to Europe and this and that, I've got obviously European in my family too. Nobody's going to leave. We're not leaving, they're not leaving, okay? We have to come to some sort of agreement. And how we do that, I think, is to revisit the concept of treaty as relationship. And to get to some specifics, because I think the Royal Commission, with all of its flaws, nonetheless came up with some pretty good points about how we need to move forward in a real way. And one of the main things is that we really got to look at redistributing land. And that scares people. But you think about the kind of what we're left with here. Outside of Alberta, the Métis have no land base. Okay, so I'm not even really speaking about the Métis here. But if you look at reservation land, 1/3 of the reservation land that was originally allotted remains now. 1/3. The rest was either never given or has been slowly eroded, expropriated, squatted on until it's lost, or outright taken. And these land seizures, by the way, have continued up until the present day. Is it Ganawage that's now just getting a bunch of land back that was taken in 1996? 1996, they're still taking land. Okay, and if you know, if you've had to deal with this at all, the encroachment on that land continues, and it's really, really intense right now. But you think about how much is left? It's 0.5% of all the land mass that is south of the 60th parallel. 0.5%, and we can't keep it. People still want it. They want to make it easier for us to sell it off, because private property is going to fix everything. So we're dealing with a situation here where already the land base has been shrunken so intensely that we're literally fighting over the tiniest scraps of land, and it's begrudged to us. People don't want us to have it at all. Okay? So we do have to redistribute the land. We have to look at where land was lost, and we have to do that because you cannot exist without land. I don't care who you are. If you don't have some resources to fall back on, whether you're actually living on the land and eating from the land, which we all do, whether you recognize it or not, if you don't have that, you can't live. And it's more important, I think, for Indigenous peoples because the way that we teach, the way that we learn, the way that we bring our culture forward is linked to the land. You can move us somewhere completely different. Okay, and in many generations we'll come to know the land well enough that we can teach that way again. Okay, but let's not do that. We've got those teachings, and I want us, all of us, Canadians as well as Indigenous peoples, to go back to those foundational principles, to go back to the land, to go back to the language, and in the language, we have a lot of these, we have many, many legal concepts, social concepts, political concepts that cannot be translated properly into English. People talk about, what do you want? What do you want? Well, we want more land back, but we also want to bring back our own systems. And in order to do that, we go back to the language, not the English language. Witaskawin, peatakeimuin, these words mean things. And they tell us how to govern our lives and how to mediate disputes and form relationships with other people. We've been making treaties for thousands of years. We're pretty darn good at it, okay? So what I'm hoping, what I see, what gives me a lot of hope, is that when we discuss these things in concrete ways with settlers who have heard nothing but stereotypes about us, who don't really know what the issues are, and who most of all don't understand what we want going into the future, like what's the plan for next year, what's the plan for the next 10 years. When we have these conversations, when we make these plans, we're making them with you. And that's all we're asking for, is for an end to this top-down, we know what's best. Because I don't think even Canadians believe that their government knows best, right? I don't know a lot of Canadians who are super happy with the way things are. And the only way that we can really come up with something that's best is if we put our collective minds towards it, if we get into that relationship, if we recognize we're in the relationship, because we're in it. It's just really abusive right now. So let's make it less abusive. Let's go back to the concepts of living in peaceful coexistence, in recognizing each other as equals. Okay? And we're not there yet. We're not even close to there yet. But with every person who asks questions, who honestly considers in their heart how they feel, what they want for their children in this country, no matter where they're from, we get a little bit closer to that. And that's my hope, is that these conversations will move that conversation forward for all Canadians and for every individual person living here. Thank you. Tansin tutemtik, Niigaan son Chelsea Vowel, egwa mantu sakaigene kotsenia, apitogosasan esqueonia, apo tpemsu esqueonia. Egwa nitayan newo nitanesak, egwa peak nitanes apo negosis uta. Egwa kirinaskomit noao Mr. He kiawao. I'm Chelsea Vowel. I'm from Lac Saint Anne. And I'm telling you that I have 4 daughters, 2 of which are here, and another daughter or son on the way. And I'm telling you also that I'm a Métis woman, or we also call ourselves the people who own themselves. That's our more extravagant name for ourselves. The Cree just call us half sons. Both are fine. And I wanted to talk briefly, because I'm very interested in having a conversation here and not just speaking to you. But the idea of treaty relationships, I come from Treaty 6 territory, and some of my family are signatories to that treaty, and some are Métis who took scrip instead of treaty. But nonetheless, we live in that territory.